And now on the line is Monica Burns. Monica is a senior campaigner with Freedom United. Monica, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much, Darren.
Okay, Monica, I got in touch with you to do this interview today on NearFM to talk about a big plan that the EU is formulating to try to ban products made by forced labour. The whole issue of slavery and forced labour is not an issue I've covered on NearFM before, and I know that your organisation does great work in the area. Could you start off, Monica, by telling me how big of an issue slavery is in the world today, and then tell me about the kind of work that your organisation does in general on the issue? Because I think a lot of people in the Western world are not even aware that slavery is a big issue.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Darren, for covering modern slavery on your show as well, because it is really so important to raise awareness. Modern slavery is extremely pervasive in the world today, and whilst the numbers that we have are estimates, the data suggests that the problem is actually getting worse. Just earlier this month, new numbers were released, and they indicate that in 2021, almost 50 million people were living in situations of modern slavery on any given day, either forced to work against their will or in a marriage that they were forced into. Now, that's an increase of 10 million since the last estimates were released around 5 years ago. And within the sector, there's general consensus that the real number is likely much higher. But as you can imagine, a large proportion of these cases go unnoticed and unreported. And then in terms of what Freedom United does, we believe that ending slavery requires wide-scale systems and values change. So that demands mass action from the bottom up to build a society that's intolerant to exploitation. So we mobilise the world's largest anti-modern slavery community, equipping people with awareness and ways to take action that drive real change. And I'd love to invite you and your listeners to join us as well in that community.
Yeah, I read on the internet that Freedom United work in partnership with over 100 other organisations, so that gives an indication of the scale of the problem. Okay, to move on to talk about the main reason I got in touch with you to do this interview today, Monica, the EU are in the process of bringing in a new law that might actually make a very big difference, I think, in the area of slavery and products made under forced labour. Can you tell me, Monica, what the EU is planning to do with this, and then tell me potentially how much of a difference this law might be able to make?
Yeah, of course. So that's right. Just last week, the European Commission published its proposal to ban products made with forced labour on the EU market. So what that would actually mean in practice is that national authorities in member states would assess forced labour risks in supply chains, triggering investigations when they have well-founded suspicions that a product may have been made with forced labour. And should the evidence back up their suspicions, they would then be able to order that product be withdrawn from the EU market. So in terms of how much that could actually make a difference, one of the real strengths of this proposal is how broad it is in scope. So it covers products made in the EU for domestic consumption and for exports, but it also covers imported goods, and it applies to products from, all sectors and regions. And that's really important because forced labour does occur all around the world and in many different industries. However, while Freedom United welcomes this proposal as a step in the right direction, it does have some key weaknesses that would make it less effective at tackling forced labour in supply chains. So we are hoping that as it passes through Europe's legislative process, it will be strengthened on 3 counts. Firstly, on providing compensation for victims. Secondly, on putting the onus on companies to prove the absence of forced labour in their products. And lastly, on stopping all goods from a region where forced labour is endemic, like, for example, the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, where the Chinese government is imposing forced labour on a massive scale.
Is there any way, like, say if the EU knows that there is forced labour happening in a particular company or area, is there any way, like, not only of stopping those products coming into the EU, but actually investigating the company so that they're caught, and the people can be released?
Yeah, exactly. So, well, that's kind of touches on two of the weaknesses that we see in this proposal. So, one of the weaknesses is that it's a bit weak on requirements on the companies to do really good supply chain mapping and transparency. So to really give the information about how they're sourcing the products to make it easier for civil society and for national authorities to investigate them. And then also in terms of the remedies, so this proposal doesn't actually require companies to provide remediation for victims of forced labour. So remediation could look like returning confiscated documents to workers, paying back stolen wages, so helping out workers who've been trapped in modern slavery debt bondage to really move forward and protect themselves from future exploitation. So you can see how without that remediation requirement, companies can still evade responsibility.
When you're saying forced labour, like and slavery, are you talking, as regards working, are you talking about people that are like kind of prisoners, like for 24 hours a day, they're just slaves in general, or people who are working for low wages, or what, like?
Yeah, so there are a lot of like myths around human trafficking and modern slavery, and often when we think of someone who's in forced labour, we think of someone being chained up in a basement or something, but that's not actually how it usually happens. So usually traffickers exploit people by taking advantage of existing vulnerabilities that might be caused, for example, by insecure migration status or financial instability, and so on. And so they might use sheer physical and emotional violence to coerce people into forced work, but it can also be leveraging, for example, a fear of deportation, arrest, using debt to control people. If people have huge amounts of debt that they have to work off, then these are other means that people use to force people into working.
And would these people be like just like working long shifts, or would they be kind of under the control all the time of the people who are kind of controlling them, like?
Yeah, so there's quite a wide range of what this would look like. For example, a good example is in domestic work. A lot of migrant domestic workers who live in people's houses, and their employers might, for example, take away their passports so they can't leave, and they might force them to do extremely long shifts, not give them access to food, healthcare, not let them leave the house in some cases, subject them to physical and verbal violence, things like this. I mean, there's quite a wide range of how this situation might look, but that's one example.
You mentioned China there. Are there any or many countries around the world, or governments, I mean, who just don't take the issue of slavery seriously? So even if it's pointed out to them that there are companies working in such and such a place in their country, that if you actually report the cases to the police forces or the governments in those countries, that they just don't care and they don't investigate and they kind of just don't sort the situation out, like?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few countries. Well, there's modern slavery exists all over the world, and frankly, we think that every country could be doing more to strengthen legislation and policies to really make their society less tolerant of modern slavery. But you ask about the China example, and I think it is an important example because it's one of the examples of state-imposed forced labour. So in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, the Chinese government is actually imposing forced labour on Uyghurs and Turkic peoples. So, that is really the largest organised detention of an ethno-religious minority that the world has seen since World War II. And since 2017, over 1 million people have been detained. And detainees are, made to work under constant surveillance, with assigned minders, no freedom to leave. And their forced labour contributes to the production of goods for numerous multinationals. So, it's really a problem that affects supply chains of products that, I'm sure many of your listeners buy and are using.
Like, I know in the Western world, the issue of corruption over the last few decades gets a significant amount of attention because there is corruption everywhere around the world, I know. But I think some countries, obviously you mentioned China there, but other countries as well, like, they're like basically like I wouldn't be I don't know a lot about the issue, but I wouldn't be confident that even if it was reported that there was slavery happening in such and such a company, that they would sort it out. But I suppose that just goes to show that legislation needs to be strengthened around the world, and police forces as well, and services. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, as you said, you want this planned legislation strengthened. Is there anything else you would like the public, Monica, like our listeners listening today on radio, to do on this planned legislation, bearing in mind that Ireland is still in the European Union, although the UK are not?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways that your listeners can get involved. And at the EU level, there's really some exciting pieces in the works, including this ban and also a wider sustainability due diligence directive that would require member states to make a national law on companies' duty to identify, prevent and address adverse human rights and environmental impacts. And that proposal has some dangerous loopholes that would really make it a failed opportunity to guarantee justice. So we've come together with 100 civil society and trade union organisations to form the Justice is Everybody's Business campaign. And I'd really encourage your listeners to join us on that campaign, learn about the proposal and take action in Ireland to push for it to be strengthened. And your listeners can find out about that campaign by going to freedomunited.org/justice.